All right, we're going to do a real quick review again here this morning. And we are now in the phase of our study where the political and religious climate in which Christ is going to appear is being really cemented. So what we study over the next couple of weeks, this really is going to establish both the religious and the political climate in which Christ enters human history. And just by way of review again, let's look to see where we've been at. We are in the Greek Empire, and the Greek Empire is pretty much coming to a close. Last week we looked at Antiochus Epiphanes, the Antichrist of the Old Testament. He was a vicious and nasty man who vented his anger and frustrations out on the Jews. Last we looked at, he had attempted to conquer Egypt. And when he went to Alexandria in his campaign, he was met by the Roman ambassador who said, you stop your campaigns, you take your army, you get them out of Egypt, and you go back home. And he dallied in his decision-making, so the Roman ambassador drew the circle in the sand around him and said, you're not leaving the circle until you give me an answer. And Antiochus acquiesced to their concerns, realizing that Rome was now a power to be reckoned with. He took his army and he left. And in so doing, he was full of humiliation and indignation over what had happened to him, and he decided he was going to take his anger out on the Jews. So, on his way back to Jerusalem, he stops to deal with the Jews, and this is sort of where we were at last week. It is his determination now. He is going to try to solidify his position by forcing Hellenism in all of his realm, and eliminating anything that is not Greek, particularly the Jewish religion. So, he adopts a policy of rigorously enforcing Hellenism on all people in his kingdom, but the Jews are the ones that really become the focus of his anger. And this, it's easy to see as you study this, that this is a satanically inspired effort to eradicate God's people and to stamp out Judaism once and for all. So Antiochus IV, he outlaws Judaism. It is illegal to claim to be a Jew. It is illegal to practice being a Jew. It is illegal to have any vestige whatsoever of Judaism, and he is going to try to wipe it out. So first, he forbade the practice of Jewish rituals and observances of Jewish rites, which included Jews were not allowed to observe the Sabbath. The Sabbath was their holy day. Rest, no work on the Sabbath day. He also outlawed circumcision. Any woman who was found to have circumcised a child, the child would be hung from the woman's neck, and they both would be cast from the wall of the city to their death for violation of the king's edicts. Their traditional feast celebrations were also halted. And then praying to Jehovah God was also made illegal. The only one they could pray to was Jupiter. Antiochus believed that he was Jupiter on earth, therefore praying to Jupiter was in effect praying to him. He had made himself God, and he demanded that the Jews worship him through their worship of Jupiter. Or Jupiter, Zeus. Jupiter is the Roman god. Zeus was the Greek. They're the same god. And it was illegal to publicly admit to being a Jew. There was also a concerted effort to destroy God's word. They sought out wherever they could find the Torah, and they were going to destroy it. And any other sacred texts, they tried to find them and burn them and rid the land of them. And then the Jews were compelled to sacrifice to the Greek gods, in particular the god Zeus. And then those refusing to consent to the customs of the Greeks would be put to death. Then Antiochus, he defiles the temple by setting up an image of Zeus in the Holy of Holies. He sacrifices a pig on the altar. Like I said, because he believes that he is Zeus, he in effect is saying, you are going to be sacrificing to me. He sets himself up through his proxy image in the Holy of Holies as being God. He is going to be the object of worship for the Jews. Now, I'd like to read again. We'll go back here to this to Maccabees, and they give us sort of the historical context. First of all, his decree, moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. and everyone should leave his law. So all the heathen agreed, according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. And then on the 15th day of the month, Caslu, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolations upon the altar, and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side, and burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. And they had rent in pieces the books of the law which they found. They burnt them with fire. And whosoever was found with any the book of the testament, or if any committed to the law, the king's commandment was that they should be put to death. Thus did they by their authority unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. So this sacrificing to this idol, there were I guess lesser idols set up in all the cities throughout Judea, and every month on the 25th, I believe this corresponds with the 25th of the month, the Jews were required on a monthly basis to sacrifice to these false gods. And again, Antiochus, he set it up, so basically sacrificing to the image of Zeus is essentially sacrificing to himself as Zeus's representative on earth. And so the abomination of desolations, because he had defiled the temple, the desolation really refers to the temple. The temple became desolate because of the way he had defiled the temple. And once he had sacrificed the pig on the altar, he had spread and really broadcast the pig's blood on everything. Whatever the Jewish people considered to be sacred and holy, he defiled it with the blood of this unclean animal. Therefore, it was not possible for the Jews to continue to do their sacrifices and to worship in the temple anymore, so the temple becomes desolate. The temple is desolate because of the abomination that Antiochus had set up there with this idol. It also states, if you look in Maccabees, and I'll read here in a moment, the temple became a place of bacchanalian festivals. I don't know if you recall your Greek mythology, but the Greek god Bacchus, he was the god of pleasure and the god of festivals. So those celebrating the bacchanalian festivals, basically they became drunken orgy festivals, and these were actually occurring within the precincts of the Holy Temple. Here in the book of 2 Maccabees, we find that for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that brought in things that were not lawful. The altar was also filled with profane things which the law forbiddeth. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient fast, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. And in the day of the king's birth every month they brought their bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. And when the fast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in procession to Bacchus carrying ivy. Moreover, there went out a decree to the neighbor cities of the heathen by suggestion of Ptolemy against the Jews, that they should observe the same fashions and be partakers of their sacrifices, and whosoever would not conform themselves to the manner of the Gentiles should be put to death. Now, before Antiochus leaves, he leaves a contingent of soldiers. The estimates range around anywhere from 10 to 20,000 soldiers are left behind. And Antiochus is going to go back to his own kingdom. And this contingent of soldiers is going to continue with a reign of terror, trying to force his edicts on the Jews and to force them to forsake God and to participate in their heathen observances. Now we have a representative of Antiochus arrived in the village of Modain, however you pronounce it, and where the village elder, a guy by the name of Mattathias, he was ordered to make a sacrifice to the image of the Jews, and he refused to do so. They came to him and they said, well, you don't really have to eat pig flesh and do your sacrifice. You can just pretend. You don't have to defile yourself, but just pretend so other people think you're doing it. And he said, to pretend I'm doing it so they think I'm doing it would be just as bad as doing it myself. I'm not going to do this. So a Hellenized Jew was one who willingly, voluntarily, lovingly embraced the Greek culture. He steps forward. He says, I will perform the sacrifice for him. Mattathias, there we go again. All right. Mattathias was enraged at this Jew's willingness to consort with the Greeks and to perform this sacrifice. So he, in his anger, stabs this Jew on the altar where he was about to perform the sacrifice, and then he stabbed Antiochus' representative as well. So he and his 5 sons, and as many of the people who had gathered themselves to him, fled to the wilderness and the village and the mountains after committing this act, and this marks the beginning of the Maccabean revolt. The Maccabean revolt would last about 25 years, from the beginning until the time that the Jews gained their complete political independence. So the Maccabean revolt was first led by one. Mattathias had 5 sons. I believe it was the 3rd son or the 4th son. I don't remember what his birth order was. He was the one that was designated to be the captain of the armies because he had demonstrated himself valorously in battle before, and he was a military man. So he is the one who commands the armies, and because of their successes they enjoy, more and more people begin to draw to the Maccabees, and the rebellion gradually grows. Now they were outnumbered by the Greeks, therefore they limited themselves to guerrilla warfare, really, against the Syrians. They attacked them in places that they laid ambushes for them. As I said last week, Jerusalem was set up so there are only a certain number of ways you could get to Jerusalem from the coast, and they mostly involved going through narrow valleys, narrow canyons, narrow passageways where a few men could stand and hold off much larger numbers in an ambush and win really significant victories in a limited sort of a way. So he wins many notable victories. Now the word Maccabees or Maccabeus is believed to derive from a Hebrew word that means hammer. So Judas, he's referred to as Judas the Hammer, Judas Maccabeus, because of the way he's hammering the Syrian armies in their fight against the Syrians. Now, I want to make it clear, this fight right here, this fight is against what these men believe is the abominable sins and effort to turn and corrupt the Jewish people. It does seem to be it's a righteous revolt from what I can see, at least at the beginning. They are fighting against the Syrians' efforts to force them into pagan practices. Approximately 3 years after the defilement of the temple, Jerusalem was retaken by the Maccabees, and then they go and they cleanse and rededicate the temple. Now, in John 10:22, we see reference to this. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter. This is a reference to this celebration. The modern day equivalent to this is Hanukkah. Okay, Hanukkah occurs on the 25th of December, actually, originally. So Hanukkah occurred long before Christmas began. Hanukkah was being celebrated, or the Feast of the Dedication, as we see in John 10:22. It was already an established observance. Now, the story behind it was that when they went in to rededicate the temple, they found one vial or container of oil for the lamp that had not been contaminated. It remained uncontaminated because it had been sealed up. So they were able to use this. This oil supposedly was supposed to only last for a day, but it actually miraculously lasted for 8 days until they could acquire more oil to continue burning the lamps within the temple. So that's why Hanukkah, the Feast of the Dedication, it's basically an 8-day celebration. Now, as far as the gift-giving part, I don't know where that comes in. I haven't studied it in depth, but my understanding is that you get a gift every day during the 8 days, and each successive gift and each successive day is supposed to be more valuable than the first. So I think perhaps the Jews have something on us for Christmas. I wouldn't mind getting one gift every day and having each one being a little nicer as you go along, you know. But that's the way they celebrate it. That's what it's all about. They're celebrating the rededication of the temple following the victory of the Maccabeans as they retook Jerusalem, retook the temple, and restored it so the sacrifices could again be performed there. So like I said, the Maccabean revolt, it took 3 years to regain Jerusalem and to retake the temple and rededicate it, but the revolt actually will continue on for many more years. Oops. After being worn down by the continuous fighting and their lack of victory over the Jews, one of Antiochus' successors, Demetrius, he grants Judea full independence in 142 BC. Now I find this interesting. This has an interesting parallel throughout history. The Lord, from what I can see, the Lord is using circumstances to prevent the enemies of his people from gaining complete control over them. In this case, Demetrius was faced with some internal revolts and problems in his own kingdom. So he's distracted. He cannot devote full attention to wiping out the Jews, and he realizes he can't do two things at once, so that's when he decides it's time to, let's cut the Jews loose, let's give them their independence, and I can focus on my problems here at home. We see a parallel to this when we leap forward about 1,500 years or so when the Reformation occurs. When Luther and the Reformation is going full bore, Charles V is the king of the Holy Roman Empire, but he's never able to really devote full attention to wiping out the Reform because he's always got all these little problems niggling at the edges of his empire that he has to deal with. So he's never able to really focus on wiping out the Reformation. There's the Turks on the east, he has rebellions, he has uprisings and insurrections he has to deal with. So the Lord uses these circumstances really to protect his people. And this is evident back here during the Maccabean revolt. Now, at this time, there's only one of Mattathias' sons remaining who has survived. The others have been killed in battle, one by one, and that is Simon. He's the only surviving son of Mattathias. He becomes both the high priest and the ruler of Judea. At this point, the high priest and the king / ruler / president become one office. So the high priest is, in effect, the de facto king of Judea. Now Simon, realizing that a king of Israel must come from the line of David, does not take to himself the title of king. He feels that would have been sinful. So he regarded himself as a ruler or a president or a governor. He did not take to himself the title of king out of respect to the Scripture. However, his descendants would not be so. They would not make such fine distinctions. They would regard themselves as the king, and they would take to themselves the title of king. So from Simon, we have the Hasmonean dynasty, which is established. Now, I have prepared, which I will hand out, I tried to put together a little family tree here, kind of lays out who's who. Most of these names you'll never heard of before. Well, I'll go through this. And again, we're building up to the coming of Christ. Christ is going to, we're only 150 years or less now out from the advent of Christ. And the stage, the whole point of this study has been to show that the world is being prepared for Christ. And when Christ comes, then the church will follow. So I tried to, I don't think it came out as blue on your copy. If you see a darker gray, a shaded box, that's the person who is actually reigning in the place of high priest / king. So Mattathias we have up at the top, and then Simon Maccabeus, the high priest, from 142 to 135. So I'm going to go through a little bit here. We're going to check our timeline real quick again and see where everything falls. Then I want to just give you some basic highlight information on each of these rulers. And if you'll see all the way down to the bottom, this starts with Mattathias in 166 BC. And we come down to the bottom, and you'll see a recognizable name of Herod. He was appointed governor of Galilee by this fellow Antipater, however you want to pronounce it. So let's start here. 142 BC, we have Jerusalem granted independence by Demetrius. That's the Hasmonean dynasty begins. The next ruler, his son John Hyrcanus, he becomes high ruler and priest, and that's followed by Aristobulus I, Alexander Jannaeus. At the same time, we have in Rome, Rome is beginning to experience its own civil wars at this time. They have their first civil war. When Alexander Jannaeus dies, his widow, who was the widow of both Aristobulus and Alexander, she rules for a short period of time. In the same period of time, also 73 to 71, if you've watched any TV at all, you've seen the movie Spartacus and the slave uprising, the servile war. This is occurring at about this time. And then 64 BC, Rome ends the Seleucid Empire. Of the four empires that came out of Alexander's conquests, 3 of them are now gone. There's only one remaining, and that's the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt, and it is not long for this world either. It will be gone soon. So the prophecies of Daniel are about, as far as these first 3 Gentile kingdoms, they are about to be fulfilled with the passing of the baton by the Ptolemaic regime in Egypt to Rome, where Rome has full control over the empires of the world at that time. 63 BC, we'll get into this in a minute. 63 BC, Rome comes into Jerusalem to settle a dispute between the sons of Alexandra, who are vying for the throne, and Rome basically takes control. That's when Rome comes in, and Rome now has a firm foothold in Jerusalem and Judea in 63 BC. So, our first guy here is John Hyrcanus. He is the son of Simon. He did exactly what the Greeks tried to do, but in the reverse. Those territories he brought under Jewish control, he tried to force Judaism on them. So he's trying to do the same thing. He's trying to make converts by the point of the sword. His rule was characterized by a secularization of the priesthood. The priesthood is really becoming just a shadow of its former self. The priesthood is a corrupt organization. Mostly, if you have the money to buy the position, you can become the high priest, or you might be appointed high priest as a reward for political favors. The priesthood really is almost a figurehead position at this point. Under his rule, you will see a realignment of political parties. We're going to look at this probably next week, and I'll begin to answer your question you had, Mike, last week about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Next week, I want to really get into these groups that arise during this period of time. That's when they all arise, really, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. All of these guys that will play prominent roles in the New Testament. We'll see where they came from, what they believed, the relationship to each other. One thing I didn't realize before I started this study was that the Pharisees and the Sadducees really were bitter enemies. They did not like each other. And they only came together because they both hated Jesus Christ. And so they're willing to set aside their differences for the common goal of getting rid of Christ, because he threatened both of them in their own particular way. Under John Hyrcanus, we have territorial expansion. Once the Jews have obtained their political independence, they do begin to expand. They increase their borders and the size of their area again. He is the first of the Hasmoneans to take to himself the title of king, contrary to what his father believed. He has no problem being called the king, even though he's not in the line of David. He was regarded as a very Hellenistic ruler. Again, it comes full circle again. What was the Maccabean revolt about? It was a response against the efforts of the Greeks to Hellenize the Jews, trying to maintain Jewish purity. Well, this guy here, he wants to go back the other way again. He's very Hellenistic in his own outlook. In fact, he's referred to as Philhellene, or meaning lover of all things Greek. And he was very ruthless in his rule, and continued with territorial expansion. And then he dies. Let's see. Right. So then the next one in line is let's see. I think I'm out of order here. Let's see where we're at. All right, Alexander Jannaeus. I think maybe the next. Well, Aristobulus reigned only for a short period of time. I'm going to skip over him and go to Alexander. He had been in prison. Continuing with territorial expansion. He is regarded as a tyrant, and then under his rule, there was an intense rift between the Hasmoneans and the Pharisees. You'll find that as these guys are vying for power, the Sadducees would fall down on one side, the Pharisees would favor someone else, and it would cause unending conflict. He sparked a riot by his behavior in the temple. Let's see. According to Pharisaic ritual, he was supposed to have poured out his libation on the altar, but instead he poured it out at his own feet. Sort of, again, another indication that he thinks he's God again, like the Greeks did. And he uses soldiers. This behavior sparked a riot where people rebelled against him. He used soldiers to restore order, resulting in the death of 6,000 Jews. This is a Jewish leader killing 6,000 of his own people in order to maintain his position. This results in another a 6-year civil war with the Pharisees at the forefront of the rebellion. Ironically, the Pharisees, who were anti-Hellenistic, they turned to the Syrian king Demetrius II for assistance. And Jannaeus is forced to flee and go into hiding. He eventually wins, and after suppressing the rebellion, he returns to power. Now, he celebrates his return to power with the Sadducees, and at this celebration, he had 800 Pharisees and their families crucified in the presence of the celebrating guests. So, again, there's no love lost between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Now, Alexandra. She was originally the wife of Aristobulus. Upon his death, she married Alexander Jannaeus. She's the only female monarch in this period of time, and she lasted from 76 to 67 BC. Now, her reign was characterized as a period of peace. There was relative things were relatively settled during her reign. She promoted education so all would be able to read the Torah, or the books of Moses. She set aside the Sadducees in favor of the Pharisees. So now the Pharisees come to prominence because of their association with her, and the Sadducees are in disfavor. As her death approached, she appointed one of her sons, Hyrcanus II, as high priest, and the other son, Aristobulus II, as military commander. And of course, she set up again a situation for civil war, which is what resulted. The two were vying for the same position. The Sadducees backed Aristobulus II, the Pharisees backed Hyrcanus II. Hyrcanus initially prevailed to become a short-term ruler, but then he decided he doesn't really want to be king, so he surrendered his position to his brother and said, "You go ahead and take it over," and he's more than happy to do so. And so at this point, Rome under Pompey takes advantage of the turmoil and conquers Jerusalem to settle the dispute. So now Rome is in control. From this point on, anybody who's in a position of power is in that position at the permission of the Romans and is a vassal of the Romans. So Aristobulus was replaced by Hyrcanus II, and he would rule without the title of a king, but he would be the high priest, and he would serve as a vassal to Rome. And he was made ethnarch, or governor of Judea. Now, we come to this fellow here. He's a rather unscrupulous guy, Antipater. He is the founder of the Herodian dynasty. He was not in the bloodline of the Hasmoneans. He actually was a close advisor of Hyrcanus, but he was a wily, slippery sort of a guy, and he was able to position himself into a position of great power. He was highly ambitious and opportunistic, and he actually served as the power behind the throne. He had gained great favor with the Romans because Julius Caesar was under siege in Alexandria. Antipater led an army of 3,000 and lifted the siege and saved him, and therefore he had great influence with Rome. And they allowed him to remain as the unseen power behind the throne of Hyrcanus II. And then he was appointed by the Romans as a chief minister of Judea, and he used his position to place his children in influential positions. He fathered 4 sons and 1 daughter. One of his sons was Herod, and he appointed Herod. If you look down here, there's 2 sons. Phasael, he was appointed governor of Jerusalem, and he appointed Herod as the governor of Galilee. Next week, we're going to look at these individuals. They arise during this period of time. Who are they? What did they believe? What is their influence? Really now, the situation, again, as I said, that Christ steps into when he comes to earth is pretty much set now through these groups. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Hellenizers, the Judaizers, the Sanhedrin, the scribes, and the Zealots. We'll look at each one of them in particular as to what they believed, what their goals were, how they got along with each other. And we will find that there's a lot of overlap between the different groups. There are a lot of scribes who serve in the Sanhedrin. There are a lot of scribes who believe themselves to be Sadducees. Some align themselves with the Pharisees and so on. So it's really hard to draw a hard, fast line between these groups. But these are the basic groups that are mentioned in the New Testament that Christ comes into, that Christ confronts for their hypocrisy and such thing as that. Are there any questions on what we've talked about so far this morning? So this is where we're at. Next week, again, we'll look at these individuals, and we'll look at the scriptures and show where they're all mentioned and what we can derive from the Bible itself as to these groups, and we'll refer to other extra biblical sources. Josephus and some others, they describe these guys in pretty detailed fashion, and so that's where we'll pick up next week. Questions? If not, then we're finished for today. Thank you, folks. Then they father all these kids through her.
Okay, because I was gonna say, because those dates, but now I see, but that's funny, Alexander, married Alexander.
And down here, if you go down here, these two guys, when they agreed to exchange, well, when he gave up the throne to him, see, he gave up the throne to him. His son, his daughter was Alexandra, his son was Alexander, and they married each other in order to make them the these two.
So they got two wives and two the same. That's something else.
That's what you call,
No wonder you can't keep
you know,
track
in the
of
Middle
who's
East, who put somebody in the Middle East?
So, I was saying that George Foreman was kind of the same.
George.
Yeah.
Not me. How many Georges have we got? Eight?
Like eight, I think.
Is it really?
I think it's eight, and there's some females that are,
They're named George too?
sons and daughters.
To me, I think that's the